I don't think anybody knows who the first walleye angler was who rowed his boat out to the middle of the lake, tossed a lure behind it, and just kept on rowing. That person started a revolution in walleye fishing and something we all take for granted today. 6 tips that are going to help you become a better troller. Stay tuned. I promise you, you'll catch more fish if you pay attention to what we're going to teach you in this short course. Pick one thing that I know all good trollers do all the time. That is pay attention to their electronics. And I would pass that tip on to you. Learn your electronics. You know, trolling to a lot of people is just driving around the lake, throwing some lures behind it, and going wherever you go. Randomly, occasionally coming across some fish. That's not what trolling is. That's driving a boat with lures behind it, and that's not trolling. Trolling is using your electronics, finding fish on your sonar, and by doing that, understanding how deep they are. By being able to read your electronics and know where bait fish is, how fish are related to the bottom, how close they are to the bottom, how close they are to structure, how close they are to open water bait fish is going to help you determine their activity level. How close are they to structure? How close are they and how much are they using open water? That's going to determine what types of lures and what kind of techniques you control with. Getting your lures to the right depth is absolutely critical, and you have to know where the fish are first so you can actually know where they are and get your lures above them. So using your sonar is a big deal. Understanding how to use regular 2D sonar and side scan are probably the 2 biggest advantages you'll have in becoming a better troller. There are applications for other sonar like downscan and forward-facing sonar, but I would tell you right now, learn how to use your 2D and learn how to use your side scan. It's going to make you a much more effective troller. Once we're on fish and we start to go through our trolling process and start to catch fish, we want to use our GPS. Our GPS waypoints in our GPS are going to show us where we caught fish. Using trails is going to show us our successful trolling passes so we can come right back on the same line and hit the exact good spots. If I'm fishing structure, using those waypoints and those trails to map out the structure, know exactly where my boat needs to be to keep my lures in the right spot to catch fish off a piece of structure is key. So tip number 1 to becoming a better troller is very simple. Learn how to use your electronics. I don't know a successful troller, be it a recreational tournament fisherman or charter captain, who doesn't find fish before they start to put lures in the water. You do that, I promise you're going to catch some more fish every time you go trolling. Chance to hop on people's boats over the course of the season. They may call me up or send me an email and say, hey, can you hop on my boat and help me kind of maximize what I'm doing here, specifically for trolling? And I'll tell you that one of the things that I see on most people's boats that are having a tough time trolling versus one of the things I see on people who are successful trollers, and that is rigging their boat properly. How do they go about rigging their boat? Now, we could talk a lot about rigging. There's a lot of details to it, but let's kind of just cover some of the basics that I think are going to help you become a better troller. Rigging right. Have rod holders. That is absolutely critical. You're going to want to run, here in Michigan, we can run 3 rods per angler. So you can't hold on to 3 rods. Now you put somebody else in your boat, you're going to have 6 rods. You put 2 people in your boat, you can fish 9 rods. Have some rod holders. Rig those properly. Move them forward. One of the things I can tell you about rigging a boat properly with rod holders is the further forward you can move them, the further forward they're going to bring your inline planer boards, the easier it is going to be able to see those boards. Use rod holders to help you get more rods, get rods off, get the rod tips up off the water. So now I can run those planer boards out 50, 75, 100, 125 feet to the side. Get your boat rigged. Make sure you've got places to put your net, to put your planer boards, to put your pliers. I get on a lot of folks' boats and everything is just kind of scattered helter-skelter. And I've got to step in a net, or a net's over top of a boat seat. We've got a nice fish to the back of the boat and they can't get the net off of, get the net off of the seat. Rig your boat properly. Take a minute to figure out everything you're going to use while trolling. Figure out where your work area is and buy the right gear to keep everything out of that work area. I had a lot of folks on my boat, they'll take off an offshore planer board and they'll set it down. I have holders for my planer boards. Rod holders are important again, right? You don't ever want to set a rod or a planer board or a net or a pair of pliers on the floor. That's an easy way for rods to get stepped on, planer boards to get stepped on and get broke. That's a very easy way for you to put a pair of pliers in a net as you're getting a fish out. Someone goes to pick the net up, pliers go into the water. So rig your boat properly. Make sure you can run multiple rods very, very easily. Make sure everything is out of the way. Now, rule of thumb on my boat is pretty simple. For every rod that's fishing, it's in a holder for fishing, I have one empty rod holder. I like to have a lot of rod holders. How many times have you been trolling and maybe you have a situation where you want to change a lure, or maybe something is boogered up and you got to re-rig it? Now you got that rod laying on the floor, right? If you have an extra couple rod holders, you can stick that rod in a rod holder. Rod tip is straight up in the air. It's not going to get stepped on. And now what you can do is work on it and rig it, get it back to normal so you can fish it and not be in the way of everything else that's going on. Sometimes you catch a fish, you've got to move a rod holder to clear a rod. Having extra rod holders on both sides of the boat helps that. Make sure you've got your boat rigged properly. Make sure you can see. We talked about how important sonar and GPS is. Make sure you can see your sonar and GPS. Make sure it's rigged properly, that you can see it and get a good view of it from where you're going to be standing when you're trolling. Take time to rig your boat properly. Have enough rod holders, have accessory holders, have everything out of the way so you have a clean work area. I promise you that's going to help you catch more walleye because you can concentrate on the fishing, not on not stepping anything. Okay? All right, let's move on. Let's talk about being consistent. One of the cool things that helps successful anglers catch more fish. My third tip to becoming a better walleye troller is pretty simple, and that is be consistent. You know, again, sometimes I hop on people's boat to help them, and I know right away some of the things I'm going to have to address just by looking at their equipment, at their planer boards, the planer board releases, their rod holders, their rods, their reels, their line combos. Just by looking at those, I kind of know where I'm going to be and what I'm going to expect, what I'm going to have to teach when we're on the water. I don't care what type or what quality your equipment is. What I care about is the consistency. It's very important that all your rods are exactly the same. We've got a blog associated with this short course. Go back and read the blog. There's a nice picture there of my rod holders. All my rod holders are exactly the same. All my rods are exactly the same. All my reels are exactly the same. Every single rod bends exactly the same way. If you look in that picture, one of those rods actually has a fish on it, and the planer board didn't move hardly at all, but I was able to tell because all of my rods are the same. They all bend the same under pressure. One rod was bending more and staying bent. It wasn't coming back and forth like the others. I knew I had a fish on. Make sure that all of your rods are the same model, style, length. They're exactly the same. Make sure your reels are exactly the same. Every time you pick a rod and reel combo out of a rod holder, it should feel the same, right? Make sure you're using the same exact fishing line, especially diameter, and you're putting the same amount of line on each reel so you can duplicate what is working. You can't have an Akuma reel and a Daiwa reel and an Abu Garcia reel, put some line on that, and some is 15 pound and some's 10 pound and some is all the way full and some are only half full. You do that, you can't duplicate what's going on and you can't see what's happening. Be consistent. Be consistent with your rod holders. Make sure they're the same. Make sure you can adjust the angle so you can get exactly the right setup on your rod tips. The further the rod is, the higher it needs to be up in the air, and we start to work down as we get closer to the boat. Those are all important things. Be consistent about where you put your rod holders. Oh boy, I see this a lot. A lot of folks will take their rod holders off to trailer their boat. They put them back in, and I go, is that where they were last time? I go, I don't know. Go out next time, put your rod holders, put an offshore planer board out, look at it. Look at where it runs in the water. Now take that rod holder and move it back 6 inches or forward 6 inches and watch how much it affects where that planer board runs. It's a big deal. I actually go as far on my track stack track system that I use on both my Polar Craft and on my Angler Quest to add extra rods. I go as far as to use a magic marker and actually mark where each individual piece goes. Rod holders I'm going to use for holding a rod when trolling, where the rod holders go that I'm going to use just for holding a rod for transporting or for rigging or moving a rod around, and where my planer board holder goes. I want everything in the exact same place, so every time I troll, everything is exactly the same. Consistency. Same rods, same reels, same line, same amount of line on each reel. Same crankbait snaps, same leader if you're going to use one. Everything needs to be the same. The more it's the same, the more you've controlled, the more you can duplicate what is working. Pay attention to consistency. I don't care if you don't have $150, $200 reels. I don't care. Go buy some value reels, some Shakespeare's or some Akumas. I'm okay with that. but buy 6 of them or buy 8 of them. So they're all exactly the same. Okay? Be consistent with your equipment is really, really, really going to help you become a better angler and catch more fish trolling, because everything is going to look the same. And when something isn't right, it's going to look different and you're going to be able to notice it. All right, let's come back and let's talk about depth control. One of the keys to catching more fish, knowing exactly where your depths are running in the water column. You know, I would say that one of the things I know that all good trollers do is they pay attention to depth control. They know exactly how deep their lures are running. They don't guess, right? A lot of trollers will go out and they'll get their boat out like, oh, there should be some fish around here. There's a bunch of boats, and they'll put, let's say, 6 lures in the water. Well, what happens almost always is at least 1, usually 2 of those lures are below the fish. Walleyes that are feeding, especially walleyes in open water, aren't going to go down for a bait. They will come up, but they won't go down. So if you've got 6 lures in the water and 2 of them are below the fish, you may have the best lure for the day and the best color, but you never let the fish see it. So what happens is you get fooled into thinking that a lure type or a lure color is the deal, just because that's the only lure that's ever been at the right depth. So as anglers, we need to know exactly where our lures are running. Understand that lures run at different depths. So if I took this glass shad wrap here and I let it out 40 feet, it'd run one depth. If I let it out 60 feet, it'd run deeper. 80 feet, it would run deeper. I think we all know that. But how do we know exactly how to let those lures out and where to get them so we know they're fishing the depths that we want to fish? Well, the work's been done. There's 2 ways you can do it. You can guess, which means letting out the same lure on a couple different rods, multiple depths. So maybe you let out a glass shad wrap 40 feet on one rod, 60 feet on another, 80 feet on another. You know that they're all running at different depths. You start to catch fish, you can reduplicate that. That'll work. Or the easiest way to do it, or the way that every good troller that I know does it, is they have the Precision Trolling app. It's an app on your phone. And what it does is it has lists for all of these baits. Most of the most common walleye baits are on that app. And what you do is you simply go to the app and say, hey, I want to get this glass shad wrap down 11 feet. I got fish down 14, 15 feet. I want to get this down 11 feet so it's above those fish. You simply go to the app, find the glass shad wrap, dial in that 11 feet you want the lure to go, and it tells you how much line you need to let out to get that lure to that depth. Very, very simple. We know where all our lures are. I know when I run even a 12, 14 rod spread on my charter boat, I know where every lure's at. I know exactly. So if I start catching fish, I know that that lure was 11 feet. That lure over there is 14. I'm going to take my 14 out and bring it up to 11 because 11 is catching fish. I know that. You should know that. If you can't keep track in your mind, don't be afraid to take a piece of paper, write it down. You need to know how deep your lures are running. Okay? Couple of things I want to talk about here. Number 1, line diameter is critical. We talked about consistency earlier. You want to have the same line diameter on every single. It doesn't have to be the same line necessarily. It has to be the same diameter, because thinner line diameter will run shallower than thicker line will with the same amount of line out. So if I have a line diameter, let's say 0.013 on one rod and 0.016 or 0.017 on another rod, I let this same lure out 60 feet, it's going to run shallower on that thinner line than it is on the thick line. I'm not doing the exact same thing. So again, consistency, all the same line diameter is a big deal. The other thing that's a big deal, and every good troller I know does this, is calibrating your line counters. Now, if you go back to the blog that's associated with this short course, I wrote a little blog. There's actually a link there to go to a video that's going to show you how to calibrate your line counters. It's extremely important. Remember, this line counter right here, every time it says, it clicks off a number, 1, 2, 3, doesn't mean that a foot of line went out. The amount of line that goes out is controlled by how full your spool is. What happens is every time this line pickup moves a certain distance across the worm gear, it clicks off one number on the counter. How much line comes out is directly relative to how big the spool is. You got a little bit of line, maybe the spool's only half full. Every time it clicks 1, you may only have let out 6 inches of line. So it says 60 feet, but you've only let out 30 feet of line. Conversely, if the spool's too full, you let out 60 feet, you may actually have 80 feet out, so your lure isn't running properly. Best thing to do, number 1, is make sure that all of your reels are the same, line's the same, and at least you have the same amount of line on every reel. That'll let you duplicate inside your boat. You want to do it completely right. What you want to do is keep adding to your spool and changing and counting, or actually measuring. You want your counter to say 100 when you actually have 100 feet of line out. Again, go back to our blog that's associated with short course, where you clicked on to start the short course. Below there is a blog. There's a link there, line calibration. So understand that my fourth tip, and something that every good troller that I know does, is they know depth control. They understand how important it is. They know exactly how deep all their lures are. That's something you need to pay attention to if you want to become a better walleye troller. All right, we just talked about depth control. Let's come back and talk about speed control. You know, just like depth control, speed control is one of those things that are absolutely critical to being a good troller. You know, I have seen situations, every good troller has seen situations where 1 or 2 tenths of a mile an hour make a huge difference. Let me give you an example. I was fishing a professional walleye trail tournament down in Bull Shoals, Arkansas, and I was on a good little bite around brush piles that were designed for crappies. I was pulling bottom bouncers with spinners on them, and I had the same amount of line out on all four of them. I had 27 feet of line out on an 1.5 ounce bouncer. That was my program. Now, I was pulling those bouncers, and here's what I found out. If I went between 1.2 and 1.4, 1.2, 1.4 miles an hour, I caught walleyes. Catching walleyes, did really well in the tournament. If I went above 1.4, same exact place, same exact lures, but if I went faster than 1.4, I caught spotted bass. If I went slower than 1.2, same place, same lures, same everything, I caught big bluegills. Speed was critical. I had a 0.2 mile an hour window to get into to catch the walleyes I needed to catch to do well in the tournament. Slower, I caught bluegills. Faster, I caught spotted bass. Speed can be absolutely critical. And every good troller I know pays attention to their speed. They look at their speed. The instant they catch a fish or a planer board goes back, the first thing they do is they look back and they look at their speed. How fast am I going? Then they calculate, hey, am I going straight? Was that fish on an outside turn? The lure is going a little bit faster. Was on an inside turn, it's going a little bit slower. But they really are always paying attention to their speed. Talk to a good troller when they come in at the end of the day and they got a bunch of fish. Talk to them about their day. Ask them what was important. See how many of them, how often. I'm going to tell you it's going to be 95% of the time or more are going to tell you how important speed was. So how can you control your speed? Well, speed over ground on your GPS is probably the easiest way to do it. It's a pretty good indicator of how fast you're moving across the water. Pretty decent indicator of how fast our lures are moving, right? Remember, as a bait changes speed, so a lure may have one action at 1.5 miles, but it has a different, faster action at 2, right? Doesn't affect depth with diving crankbaits. It may affect depth with weight. So we really have to dial in on our speed, because going 1 or 2 tenths of a mile an hour faster or slower for fishing lead core or snap weights or inline weights may actually make our lures go higher or lower in the water column. So we have to pay attention to what our speed is. Speed over ground is probably the easiest way to do it. Make sure you're watching it and make sure you can duplicate it. If you want to become a really, really good troller, you need to understand what the true speed of your lure is, and that means some kind of way to know what's going on down with your lures. I use a fish hawk. It's one of my favorite tools that I use, and anytime I'm trolling, it's in the water. I use the portable one. It's very, very easy to set up, take it to any boat. What it does is I put it down to the depth where my lures are running, and what it does is it comes back to me and lets me see any subsurface currents that I'm dealing with, okay? How important is it? I can give you an example of last year. I was trolling in fairly shallow water, 13, 14 feet of water on Saginaw Bay, and I caught 11 fish on my first pass going south to north. I turned around and came north to south, same exact speed, same exact lures, and caught nothing. I turned back, went south to north, caught a couple fish, put the fish hawk in the water. There was a 0.6 of a mile an hour current, meaning if I was going 2 miles an hour, going south to north, my lures were actually going 2.6 because the current was pushing into them. They were actually going 2.6 action. Turn around, put the boat at 2 miles an hour, that 0.6 of a mile an hour current is pushing my baits. It's actually taking pressure off. Now my baits are running at a 1.4 mile an hour action. Once I figured that out, I was able to go 2.0 on my GPS south to north and catch fish. I turned around, I went 2.6 on my GPS. That got my speed the same on my fish hawk. I caught fish going both ways. Understand that GPS speed is a very, very critical piece to use, but it's not the whole story. If you want to be a good troller, if you want to catch more fish trolling, paying attention to your speed is important, but not just your speed over ground. Make sure you have a way to see what's going on below the surface. You're going to catch more walleyes. But to get started, before you have to buy a bunch of fancy equipment, just understand that speed is critical. Changing speed is the easiest thing you can do. You don't have to bring any lures in to change speed. And it's the first thing I do. If I'm going over fish, seeing them on my sonar, I know my lure's at the right depth, and I'm not catching them. First thing I do is not change lures. The first thing I do is change my speed. I may go through those fish one more time a little faster, one more time a little bit slower, because speed is the easiest thing to change and can be the most important piece of the trolling puzzle every day. Pay attention to your speed control. Okay, we talked about finding fish. We talked about rigging your rod right. We've talked about depth control and speed control. Let's wrap this short course up talking about keeping good fishing records. Well, my last tip is pretty simple. Keep good detailed fishing records. And again, every good troller that I know keeps good fishing records. And I don't really care how you do it, right? Write it down in a notebook. Make yourself a note. Do it digitally with a voice recorder. Doesn't really matter. Just make sure that you do it. I promise you, if you do it for 3-4 trips, you'll be surprised how fast you start to see patterns emerge. And if you do it for a whole season, you'll see how seasonal patterns change. And if you start to do it for a second season, you'll start to really see patterns emerge. You know, I fish places and times a year, I may fish the same lake, like let's take Saginaw Bay. I start there in late May, early June, and I fish it through August. Through my record keeping over the years, I know that 2 or 3 times during that time frame, the preferred bait size of the fish is going to change. It's going to start with like a 7 or a 9. As I get into summer, I get a little past Father's Day, I kind of get into that late June, early July. It may go down to a size 3 or size 4 because there's a whole bunch of small shiners and small perch. Once that's over, we go back to a 7 or 9. And as I roll into late August, as I start to go into that late summer, early fall transition, it may go to 11 or 13 size. Having good detail records lets you see that. Maybe you'll find out that on your lake, there's certain colors that work really good when the sun's out and different colors that work better when they're cloudy. Having good records is a big deal, a very easy way to keep track of all that. Now, what do you put on those records? Well, obviously wind, wave, weather, water color, water clarity. What's the temperature of the water? What's the temperature of the air? Where's the wind coming from? All those things are important. We call those conditions. Then every time you catch a fish, where did you catch it? What's the latitude and longitude? How deep of water were you in? How fast were you going? What lure were you using? What color was that lure? How far back? So how deep was that lure running? All those things are important. If you keep track of all that data, I promise you'll start to see patterns emerge. Hey, go back where you actually started to watch this video and read our blog. There's a link there to get the catch report sheets that we actually use here at Walleye 101. It's a sheet that I designed about 20 years ago. We pass it out at all of our events. It's a sheet that I still use, and I know a lot of our anglers actually use it to keep good records. Then what I do is I simply put it into a loose leaf binder by lake and by year, and I can go back and I can look at data. I can tell you that in cold water in Lake Erie, that white, dark purple, or gray colored body baits catch more fish than silvers and golds do most days. I can tell you that spots, dots, stripes help make a lure more effective. I can tell you on Saginaw Bay that as the water heats up and gets around the mid 70s up to the 80s that I want to fish smaller baits. Size 5 shad wraps, size 5 flicker shads, size 5 flicker minnows, small little warrior spoons, because there's a bunch of small bait. I know from my records that once I get into that second week of August, I can start going back to bigger baits because all the smaller bait is either grown or been eaten. I can tell you all of that because I keep good records. I would tell you, if you do nothing, if you get nothing out of this today, the biggest thing I would tell you would be to keep good fishing records. Write down what works, and just as important, write down what doesn't work. Because if you're faced with those set of conditions again, you now know what not to do, and now you have a jump start on getting to doing the right thing. Keeping good records is the fastest way to become a better angler. It's going to give you information that you might not have had, allow you to see patterns, and I think more importantly, allow you at the end of the day to think about your day, think about some things you missed, and maybe reflect on some of the good things you did, and they become good memories. All right, I'll be back here in just a second to wrap up this short course. Hopefully so far you've learned a little bit. Well, hopefully we've showed you that trolling is just not taking your boat out, throwing lures behind it, and driving around the lake. Look at good trollers are cut above, and they're different than people who just troll. Good trollers pay attention to electronics. They know how deep the fish are. They know where their spots are. They know how to duplicate a good trolling pass, right? They've got their boat rigged properly, so they have lots of room to work and nothing is in the way when they're fishing. That's important for them. They are consistent. All their rods, all their reels, all their line is exactly the same. So everything is the same. So they can see little differences on their planer boards, on their rod tips. Everything is exactly the same. Good trollers pay attention to depth control. They know exactly where to put their baits. They know exactly how to get them exactly where they are. And they know what's going on in their spread, so they can duplicate and quickly get lures at the wrong depth out and back out and get into the water at the right depth. They pay attention to speed, both above and below the surface, so they know they're getting the exact right speed that walleyes want. That changes daily, sometimes hourly. That's something you should pay attention to. And lastly, all good trollers, and one of the things you should do to become a better troller is make sure you keep good records. Those things are all going to help you catch more fish this year as you're trolling. Pay attention to those 6 tips, put them into practice in your boat, and I promise you, you're going to start to become a more effective, more efficient troller and catch more fish.